Welcome to the Workforce Link podcast, where we're offering forward-thinking conversations for the workforce, linking employers and job seekers to a brighter tomorrow. I'm your host, Sunday Joe Graham with the Central Workforce Development Region, and I am glad to be back with you for another episode. Not only that, this is actually our last episode of Season 5. And I think this past season has been one of my favorites. I've had the opportunity to interview some really great people, some great resources. And based on feedback from several of our listeners, you've enjoyed it as well. So I'm keeping that in mind for season 6. And speaking of interviews, I am super excited about today's guest as well. Now, if you've been laid off, or if somebody that you care about has lost their job recently, you are not alone, okay? In today's episode, we have Ken Coleman here to talk with us about some practical and effective ways to help you move forward, even in the face of anxiety and uncertainty. Ken Coleman is a career expert and author of the national best-selling book, From Paycheck to Purpose, and the #1 national bestseller, The Proximity Principle, which is one of my favorite books, by the way. He hosts the Ken Coleman Show, a nationally syndicated, caller-driven show that helps listeners discover what they were born to do. Ken makes regular appearances on Fox News, and he co-hosts The Ramsey Show, which is the second largest talk show in the nation with 18 million weekly listeners. Through his speaking, broadcasting, and syndicated columns, Ken gives people expert career advice, providing strategic steps to grow professionally, land their dream job, and get promoted. And today, he's got some tips to remind you that though you may have lost your job, you have not lost everything. We're going to talk about what to do after being laid off, how to find a job, how to tap into your support system, and find confidence for your job search. So without further ado, let's dive in to today's episode with our special guest, Ken Coleman. Well, Ken, thanks so much for being here with us today, for taking time out of your schedule to talk to our listeners. We really appreciate it.
Well, I'm happy to be with you and honored. Thank you.
So you wrote an article called What to Do If You Are Laid Off. And I wanted to dive deeper into that today because we have a lot of people that we work with, dislocated workers, people who are trying to figure out, what do I do after a layoff? They're trying to not panic. They're trying to figure out what the next step is, worried about their families, all the things that comes with that. So would love for you to dive in deeper with that, with us in that today. So my first question would be, can you tell us a little bit about the current state of layoffs in the job market? What industries you think have been most affected in that?
Yeah. Well, I'll give you a snapshot first, the first part of your question of where we are in the labor market, because it's kind of a weird labor market. And what I mean by that is we're seeing in some instances what it seems to be are competing headlines. So let's look at the May job report, because those are the latest numbers that have come out. So as we sit here and talk today, that's what we're dealing with. So we saw that the economy added 330,000 plus jobs. I think it was 339,000, but either way, more than was expected. So you look at that and you go, wow. So we're seeing inflation high and unemployment low. And then they were going, well, are we going to go into recession? A lot of economists are predicting a recession in the third or fourth quarter this year. And so when you see positive job numbers like that, you go, all right. Okay. But then you see, well, unemployment went up a tick and you go, well, what's going on there? And that was a result of, we did see an increase in jobless claims. And yet our unemployment rate is still at 3.7%, which is really, really low. 3.4% is an all-time low. And that was just a couple of months ago. So what's weird is you're seeing headlines about jobless claims are up, but the economy's adding more jobs than expected. And so you need to understand that we're still in a very healthy job economy. That's what you take away from that.
Right.
Are people being laid off? Yes, because the interest rate hike by the Fed has absolutely affected business. And then rumors, and I mean rumors, of recession in the third and fourth quarter of last year led to massive layoffs by Google, 10,000, Meta, same amount, Salesforce, all these massive public companies laid people off and they got the headlines. And so what that does is the media loves to jump on that, right? Because it's clickable and they're reporting the facts. But it turns out that other companies start looking at this thing going, uh-oh, if Google and Meta are laying people off, what should I be doing? And
Right.
so there's a bit of a Simon Says here, and so companies start following larger companies. Well, what's interesting about those layoffs, those tech layoffs, and we've seen this in the data, is that when we see a lot of tech workers laid off, and that's what you saw, a lot of tech workers for these larger tech companies that overhired during the pandemic, they were getting hired within a month because the job economy is so strong. So where one big company would cut, because remember this, when big companies cut, it is about stock price first and foremost. They are beholden to the stockholders. That's the way the game works. You don't have to like it, but that's how it works.
Right.
And so what happened is we saw a lot of tech workers get snapped up really quick by mid-sized companies, even smaller businesses. So that's the snapshot, that we still have more jobs available, over 10 million, than we do people who are unemployed, and that's just a bit over 8 million. So great job economy right now. Now, the second part of your question was the sectors where we've seen, most of the layoffs. And again, it would be big tech, because again, they had a lot of workers they didn't need. That's what they said. We overhired. So we just were kind of setting the new watermark as to what we need to be efficient and be profitable.
Right.
But what we're seeing in the numbers is leisure and hospitality gaining. That's a really good sign, because if you'll remember, during the pandemic, that industry got crushed, right? People were like, I'm not going to work in the restaurant. I'm going to go deliver food, and then we saw obviously a lot of shutdowns with your leisure and hospitality industry. So what we're seeing in the latest job report is good gains there. So overall, weird headlines, still healthy job market.
I actually live in Branson, Missouri, one of the biggest tourist destinations there is. And so, boy, did we ever experience that. And we're slowly starting to gain that back, where you can go to a restaurant and it not be so understaffed that it takes a little bit to get served. But yeah, you could definitely feel the hit here.
That's a good sign.
In the article, you recommend taking some time to reflect after being laid off. So what are some key questions that individuals should ask themselves during that reflection period?
Yeah, I love this. You want to get some real perspective. So some of the questions you need to ask of yourself, and some questions you need to ask of others around you. And I want to point out that the people you need to be talking to when you've been laid off, it needs to be very selective. Don't just rush to the first shoulder to cry on. And the reason is the data shows us, psychology studies show that when a person is laid off or fired, and we'll just classify these briefly, laid off, you didn't do anything wrong. It's a part of a bigger cut. You're largely a number. Okay. Fired, well, something went wrong one way or the other, and they're kind of going, you need to move on, right?
Right.
Either way, when you lose a job, it has the same emotional impact as losing a loved one. I remember the first time I read that, I was kind of shocked. But then as I dove into, what's going on, it makes a lot of sense. You feel as though you have done something wrong. Even if you've been laid off and you didn't do anything wrong, but if you got fired and you did something wrong, or maybe you didn't, but maybe it was just some kind of tension there. Either way, you walk away from a situation like that, and the traumatic effect is, first and foremost, I have failed bitterly. I'm hurting. I feel maybe a sense of desperation because I need this job. I'm living paycheck to paycheck. This gets real quick.
Right.
I feel a sense of shame. I got to tell my loved ones. I can tell my spouse I got fired. This is tough stuff, and it rocks our emotional world. So the questions you need to be asking in this moment is, what can I learn from this? Okay. So if you're laid off, you're going to look at that situation and go, what can I learn? Is there anything to learn? Okay. In a situation where you were fired, maybe there's a dispute and you don't believe you should have been fired, but maybe you have some responsibility. We got to look at, what do we learn from this? It would be awful to get rocked emotionally like this and not have the maturity to step into it and go, all right, this sucks, but what can I learn from it? So that's the first question I think you need to be asking yourself. All right. Then I would take that question to some very trusted people, and the people need to be truth tellers. You need some truth tellers in this in this examination process. What can I learn? What am I looking forward? Is there something I can take away from this situation that will inform what I do next? You know, that's what we're looking for. We want some accountability there so we can say to someone, here's what I'm feeling and thinking. And if they're truth tellers and they know us well and they're objective, they can help us make sense of this so that we actually come out of this with, okay, I was feeling this, shouldn't have felt this. Didn't sense this, should have. And now I'm feeling the proper thing. And I've now got some perspective. And the other questions that I would be asking is, okay, what does this mean for my future? Instead of focusing on all the past, it's immediately, what does this set me up for right now? Because now I've been forced into a fresh start.
Right.
And so do I want to stay in this kind of work? Do I want to stay, if you will, on this seat of the bus that I was on? Do I want to move buses? Is this the time now to make a much bigger change, a much bigger pivot? I think those are a few of the questions that you need to be asking, because at that point now we want to learn something, and now we want to start to plan and get proper perspective so that we take some intentionality and we just don't feel like we're being blown by the winds of fortune, like, oh, this is bad fortune. I got fired. Well, let me get blown into this job over here because it's a paycheck. And I think that's really harmful.
I would agree with that. And I love what you said in the beginning, because I think we need to take time to grieve that, because in a way we've experienced some trauma. And we get this idea that trauma is just big, or it's the death of somebody or something like that. But really it was a traumatic event, and we need to take a minute to process that.
Yeah. And you know what? I think 2 or 3 days or whatever is your normal grief process, but I would own it. If you need to eat some ice cream and watch movies for a full day, come on. I mean, there's no shame in your game. That's why they make sweatpants and hoodies,
That's right.
If you need to go spend some time with some of your favorite people that make you laugh, do that. Cry for a day, laugh for a day, go ahead and just grieve the way that you normally grieve so that you can get on the other side of this and realize that, hey, it's not the end of the world.
Yeah. Love that. I love that. You kind of touched on this, but do you have any other advice that you would give for those who are feeling overwhelmed or anxious after losing their job, after they've kind of done that grieving process?
Yeah. So this is where we've got to make sure that we are dealing with good, logical thoughts, because in these times, fear and doubt just love to jump up and down on our shoulders, and they're taking turns screaming in our ear. So the way I define fear is, I'm worried that something bad is going to happen. And then doubt is, I don't believe that something good can happen. Now, they're two very different thoughts,
right?
But man, they just hang out together. And so what you've got to do here is go, all right, I've grieved, I've learned, and now I've got to get my mindset in a place where I can get back up on the ladder or the mountain, you choose your metaphor, and keep on climbing, right? Get back on the track and keep running. And so what we got to do is in those moments, we've got to identify very specifically what we're afraid of. It's not enough to go, oh, I'm just feeling anxious and I'm worried. That's not enough. That's just like saying my stomach hurts. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so it does no good to go, oh, my stomach is upset, not do something about it.
Right.
Or my leg hurts, I can barely walk, but not go to the doctor.
Right.
So what we got to do is go, okay, I am dealing with some serious anxiety or fear or doubt or whatever's going on. And now we need to go, okay, what is the fear itself? All right. Am I worried that something bad is going to happen? Yes, Ken. Okay. Write it down. I'm worried. I'm afraid that if I don't get a job in the next 30 days because of my finances, that we are going to go bankrupt. We will be forced to sell our house. We'll live under a bridge. Yeah, just be honest about it. Right. No one else has to see this, but write it out. What is the worst fear that I am like staring at? Okay. So we write it out and we look at it. And again, this comes from psychology studies. You say there's great power in getting a thought out of your head and writing it down. So now I can look at it and I go, okay, all right. So what must be true? Or in other words, what must happen for this fear of us living under a bridge in a cardboard house? What has to happen?
Mm-hmm.
And at this point now we go, okay, I'd have to do this stupid thing and then this dumb thing. And, it's like, okay, am I really going to do that?
Is that
And see, the way
reality?
you're laughing right now is we hope that we kind of catch ourselves and go, okay. So then what that does is it takes our mind off of this, which is usually an outrageous fear that involves a lot of boneheaded, lazy, you pick the adjective that would get you to that. And then you just go, wait a second. All right, here's what I know. I'm feeling this way because I'm living paycheck to paycheck. And this moment in time is when I decide I'm never going to live paycheck to paycheck again. So now we see what's happening. We begin to take a little bit of initiative to go, okay, never again. All right. So now resolve to do what it takes for that. So first thing is I got bills coming up. I need a paycheck. I'm in the best gig economy in the history of the United States right now.
Right.
I'm in the best freelance economy in the history of the United States right now. I'm going to go get 1 job, 2 jobs, 3 jobs. Why? Because I need some peace. I'm already grieving. I don't need to be stressing.
Right.
That is a cocktail of emotion that very few of us can handle. So I'm hopefully I'm working through the grieving process, or I've worked through it. Okay. And so now I'm going, all right, I don't want to be stressing. And the number one way to take care of stress is going, I'm going to bring in some money. It may not be something I'm proud of. It may not be something I call the whole family or I post on Facebook, but by golly, it's a job and it's going to take care of me, or it's 2 jobs. So we get stable. So once we're stable, then we go, okay, where do I want to go? What is it that I want to do? Well, what path do I